Oh, hey, Michael. How are you today?
I am pretty good. Pretty chill today.
Oh, how's the weather in the UK? It's been a while since I last.
Same as usual, cold and wet. Uh, nothing major changes there.
Well, first question I always ask everybody is, how do you like your coffee in the morning?
So, as soon as I get into my office, the coffee machine, we have one like an espresso machine. It is literally next to the door as I walk in. So before I even put my bag down, a pod goes in, a cup goes under, I press a button, set up my laptop, and then walk back and get my coffee, which is usually just any pod that is the quickest available one for me to get into my system.
I like the efficiency behind that, and the routine behind that. It's like, we ain't messing around. We're just going to put the coffee pod in, we're going to have it.
That's it.
And that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. And that is, when I'm saying about routine, it is repetitive tasks over and over again. So, Michael, what is it that you do and why do you do it?
I guess to an extent, or overall, is probably more web development. But we kind of touch on probably what's close to like software development or process improvement. So we generally get involved in businesses where they need to look at either speeding up a process or working on some kind of solution which isn't your standard kind of homepage, service page, website. Usually there is some kind of system behind it. So a lot of the times for me, my time is like system thinking or working through processes and understanding them before we even get close to actually doing anything specifically for that person. So it's really a lot of business understanding before we get anywhere close.
And why is it that you do that? Why is this your focus?
So I started doing IT many years ago, like 13 years old or something. I was doing general websites and learning it, and they were not very good. I'll start with. But then, I went to like university, and that was fine. But when I started, the first main job was working in banking. And most of the time I was doing kind of like manual entry work, so very much repetitive tasks, all day repetitive tasks. And from a person that has IT knowledge, I very much disliked it because I always felt there's got to be a way to do this better. So at that stage, I was like making random bits of code at the same time and trying to like speed up the process. Like I made like a little widget where you would tick some buttons and it would make your notes for the end of the case automated rather than having to type them every time. So I started to do that kind of process, and the more and more I did those, I started to enjoy it more and trying to create the efficiencies. And I went on to do a fair few different things within the banking area, but more into automation and coming away from just processing cases to actually looking at the kind of systems kind of life cycle to an extent and that kind of process. So I definitely enjoy fixing things, shall we say.
Yeah.
Sometimes breaking things, but mostly fixing things.
I love that. That's your drive. It's the like, this is you're solving your own pains basically.
100%. It all filters from pure hatred of process, and then it stems from there. And then I feel that when I'm talking to a lot of my clients is they're not just saying what they want to improve, but they are irritated by this process and they want it to be looked at. So I like being able to come in and be able to, I guess, support that and try and see what we can do to make it a little bit easier.
And for people listening, basically, definitely stick around because we're going to get to some really good stuff, like sort of towards the end of the episode. But I want to just linger on there for a moment. What does that scenario look like? I always like to do a bit of like, let's role playing out and storytelling. If CEO, I'm just going to put it as a blanket, C-suite, comes to you, Michael, and they're going, I am frustrated by this X, whatever it is. Usually it's a big massive pain point in their systems. Yeah. What is that lean approach that you then take them to get them to a more streamlined vision as their desired goal?
Often the times at the start are just general quick overviews to see what kind of stuff is going on, to get some understanding. Depending on where they are geographically, we've done some travel where's needed, but similar to you where you're a lot further from me right now over in America, I have clients there and I've got some clients in like New Zealand, so it's not always easy to quickly travel and find out what's going on. So there's a lot of calls like this, generally without being published, or similar calls. So what that would usually be is I would sit with them and go through the full process, but instead of it being written down, I want them to actually show me how it's actually happening in real time. So they'll show me the flow, show me how it's actually happening, and then we'll then look at maybe some different solutions. Sometimes it could be tech solutions. Sometimes actually some of the solutions are a lot more basic that we work with, which is more just understanding the flow and changing how it operates from a start point to end point, and where people get involved in it. But we'll first of all look at what the process is, then we'll fully map it out, usually on some form of like flow chart or something, and then we can identify throughout those stages of flow which parts are causing the maybe bottlenecks or the issues, or where are the problems mainly occurring, and we try and go through all those parts. Let's say sometimes we'll perform like a quick fix just to get something over the line, but then we'll then invest the time further down the line to start looking at maybe what is causing those issues, to really work out why we even got to that process in the first place. And some of it even just comes down to general staff training to support them and to make sure that people are following the process the right way, or just the right documentation needs to be put together.
Okay, so that's it sounds like it gets a little bit more to the solution. So now you let's just say you got a more mature business. From my experience, it's about 50-50%. It's about 50-50 whether they've got that workflow mapped out. But let's say they do have that workflow mapped out. They've been proactive. How do you go about, one, identifying the bottlenecks, but then also identifying what is valuable time and non-valuable time within that workflow?
So depends on what kind of process. Sometimes we work on pretty much just pure IT parts, where I guess value time to an extent is just processing time. There is no people as part of that process, so it's a little bit easy to sort out. If we're talking about the people process, we usually then go through looking at what is the end solution goal of this process. So we're working on one fairly recently where mostly it was about storing data, but post storing data, it was about the analysis and all the elements that came with kind of how it was going to look and map, and the main issue was the speed of it. It was taking too long to generate reports, and then in turn people were waiting rather than actually proactively doing anything in the office, and there was just a lot of time for that process. So we got involved first of all just to have a look at actually as a way to look at that process. So we started to go through all the analytics and work out what was it actually trying to calculate, what we were trying to do. And what we were actually finding was we were storing a lot of information, but we were storing too much based on what the Canberra reports we were needing at that juncture. Okay. So it was about mapping the right type of information, because there was a lot of non-value added time kind of storing data, and people were manually collating this data as well. This wasn't like system driven data, this was manual collation. So you've got people manually filling in like survey style information throughout this process, but like 60% of that one was not even being used. Some of it wasn't even actually being stored either as well. So it was going through those processes, going through that process and working out what parts were actually adding value to the business, what parts did it actually need to generate its end goal for that process, what parts were potentially needed that we might need to store, and what parts were just non-value adding information. So, based on that process, we started to look at the people that were collating the information, because obviously their speed was inherently increased anyway because they didn't have to collate so much information. We then looked at the storage solution, and then we had, I guess, savings costs from storage, because that's the thing. And then we started to look at the actual reports being quicker as well, because there was just less data to trying to interrogate and trying to work through. So it was going through all those stages, but I guess the big part there is just going through each step of the process, usually talking to the relevant stakeholders about why we're holding this information, what's the use of it, does it have a benefit for us, or are we just storing it for storage sake? Which I think when we've had a lot of like long-term businesses, that's usually the biggest thing, where they're storing things because they've always stored things, or they're doing a process because they've always done this process, and Shireen Accounts has done that process since 2001, so let's carry on doing it. But QuickBooks does it automated, so why are we doing it? All those different processes that we were going through to try and work out what was the end goal of that information.
I mean, that is a really good point. There's so much in there we could be diving into, but that last one's a really good one, because I don't want to call out the manufacturing firms. This is a very typical thing of the manufacturing industry. If they stick by the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, But that almost goes against like an optimization mentality, which the marketeers fit under, where they are constantly breaking and fixing things to test to then get to the optimum. That's usually the marketing mindset. So let's use I can't remember what you called her, but let's use Karen in accounts, who's always done the finance process the same way for the last 30 years, and that is a very typical scenario in the UK that I've seen. How do you, when is the right time to automate? Because if I fill it out a bit further, automation is the sexy term that everybody wants to talk about in business, because we now have intelligent automation, we have AI automation, we have we got RPA automation, we have every kind of way that we could be doing this. So if she's always done it and it always works, how does the business know when it's the right time? Because that's not going to be an obvious pain point.
No. And that is a tough one, because I think identifying it from a business that's been doing it for the last 20 years or however long is the harder part, because as far as they're concerned, that's a value-adding process. They've always done it. It was needed for something. There was a specific reason it was being done. And I think that is the hardest part to identify, which is where it's sometimes easier. So I've worked with businesses in the past where they ask us to come in for the day, and we'll spend time with different staff to see their process, and we make a lot of notes. Now, as you can imagine, we'll make some notes and we'll say, this one doesn't seem like a real process and it doesn't work the way it should work. And we'll go into the room with the relevant parties that be, and they go, actually, we do need this because of X. Great. We found out that there's a reason for it. But having an outside perspective is always a good review of that process, because they generally find things that when you're in the weeds every day, you often miss, or you're just in that kind of rigmarole of process. When you usually find things that do need to look at automation, usually it goes down to your increase in workloads, but your staff is increasing at a alarming rate. That's usually a good indication, because there's often places where you can automate processes without having to explicitly increase headcount, or even just adjusting a process to split it out into different segmental parts could be a more efficient process. There's obviously different ways. We were working with a company recently. They have 50 staff, like nurses, doing a lot of different elements. Their workload has increased by 4 times now of what they were before, but we've been able to keep the headcount pretty similar, because we are looking at automating solutions. But there's a trade-off there, because from getting someone involved in automation, there is a cost. It's not that you're saving the additional people, because there is a difference. The main idea is the long-term cost that you want to be looking at. So sure, it might cost, I don't know, 45,000 or so as a general number to automate a certain process, but that is maybe 1 person or 2 people per year. And if you were saving 10 people a year, you've got a significant saving already. It's just over the long term rather than the specific short term for the automation process. But generally, if you're having to increase staff quite quickly, there's an issue there. I would always probably question just general processes if you aren't sure why they're done. And if someone says because someone's done it, then I think there's always that challenge of saying, like, what is the actual need for this process that needs to be gone into? And again, I do think that's a little bit easier when you have someone externally, because they can review that process, because they can leave at the end of the day and there's no issues. So and they can easily go in with I don't know your business mentality. Like, I need you to explain it to me in the easiest way possible. So there's a lot of really easy ways to do that process. But yeah, headcount is definitely one. Another one is, so I was with a business recently. You'll like this one. So this is a business around about, I would probably say it's about 18 years old now. Very transactional. So there's people coming into the shop, buying things, people online buying things, etc. Everything goes through like an EPOS system. So they've got like an electronic point of sale system, so it's all being stored. But they printed out every invoice in, like the 3 copies, the white, the pink, the yellow. They printed them out, gave one to the customer, held one, put one in storage, and these guys were selling. I think they were selling around 30,000 units per month. Or invoices per month, but they were storing them all. So I went to the office and there was filing cabinets everywhere, full of paper that they do not go into, and there is a copy online as well. There is no need to store the paper. Their printers are working on overtime to print it, and then someone had to file it, store it, and again, they didn't see an issue with that process, but just someone coming in going, why are we storing this? And they were like, I don't actually know why we're storing it. It was like, okay, let's stop storing it then. And I don't know. Sometimes you go in, it's like sometimes things are really obvious and you can't see them. And sometimes they're a little bit harder to identify when you really go into system thinking. When we start looking at more coding-based elements, so all them are very much process and kind of. Yeah.
I like all of these examples because they are very. If you've got a legacy business, what I mean by that is like it's very mature. Yeah. You've been around for a while. The paper one is a great example. We had an objective in our business to have more green CSR. Everybody went paperless in the company, and it took my dad, obviously who's the founder, just a little bit longer, because if you've done something for 30 to 35 years, it's really hard to just change overnight. But he got there. He's 100% paperless, but it took a little bit longer just because of the thought of it. And then I also really, really like the people one, because that's a really good symptom of a scaling high growth business, because when you're in a scaling high growth business, it is chaos. Especially if you're a startup with a huge amount of investment, which is typically the world I live in, where the team's only about 15 people, but you're adding people on a monthly basis. Systems are changing, responsibilities are changing, and it is really hard to lose. It's really easy to lose track of, actually, is this process working? Should we be changing it? What is the best approach? And it's just this constant discussion all the time, when actually with a little bit of a pause analysis, you can see, okay, are the team running at 110%? The obvious answer for most CEOs is to go, let's add more people. Yep. When actually, no, when we look at the review of I always like to say the word resources, because then that involves technology, people, cash flow.
Yeah, and the paper and the stationery as well.
Paper, stationery, yeah, everything. I always like the word resources, because it's actually, no, we only have a finite amount of resources, and we have this 12-month vision. What is actually going to be the better solution here than just constantly adding people? And it's like a mind reframe then, because then you start thinking that way. You're like, oh, actually.
Yeah, I think that the hard part is the identifying is always the biggest part. We were working on one fairly recent. This one's a lot more IT based rather than, there was people involved. So we had a process where a lot of documentation was being stored. So we talk about that kind of nurse process I was looking at before. They were storing medical records, or collating them, and there's a lot. This was a US-based company, and documentation for medical data in the US is very hard to get, because it's not like over here. So if you're in the UK, you've got like the NHS, it's all like one main system. In the US, everything's its own business. So they're all independent, they're all isolated, so gathering the relevant medical data is very hard. So for people who don't know, so I have medical insurance. You sit within your medical insurance group, so that's how then these practices work. So the hospital or the practice signs up to that insurance group, but if you need any support and help as a person, I have to stick within the groups, otherwise it's very costly for me. Rather than just going to any group, any hospital or anything when it comes to down to an emergency, like it is in the UK. Yeah, it's a very different system, and so they were getting a lot of documentation. So their role really was to I'll simplify it because it's kind of complex, but as a simplification, their role was to gather documentation for patients, to collate it, to review it, to get a summary of it, and then provide said information to third parties, sometimes patients, sometimes law firms or medical agencies or doctors or whatever the process is. But theirs was a lot of collation. So they were getting it from like an IT-based system or multiple, but then from a storage and a collation, it was very manual. There was uploading files to things like Dropbox and transferring for every patient. There was just the whole kind of like how they were going to collate the information and pass it over. There was CSVs all over the place. There was a huge amount of different ways that things were being done, which is fine with different companies. There is always different processes. But they had a process where they would get the documentation. They would then store it on something like OneDrive. They would then store some of the patient information on a CRM system like Monday, like ClickUp. This was like one that's very specific to kind of medical and law for all the HIPAA protection. And then they would then create like a private link for the document. Then they would send that specific private link to the end user. Then they would be able to download it. There was a lot of change to that process to be done, and it was all manual. They also had to then, every time they were getting the documentation from like a third party, if it took a while sometimes to collate, so they would go to the system and say, is it finished yet? No. Okay, I'll check back later. And they would then schedule it in their calendar for a member of staff to go back and check if it's finished. Let's say 4 hours later, they go back and check. Is it finished yet? No. All right. Put it back in the queue. And if it was finished, great. I'll start downloading the documentation. I'll start moving it on. So we got involved because that first part of the process where they were kept checking it was an IT system. So we were able to look at creating a solution where the system would do the checking, not a user. The system would also then download the documents, not a user, because some of these documents were like hundreds of meg gigs, and people would download them. So you're talking minutes for download, then they'd have to upload to the next system, and then you're talking longer than minutes. They were going through all those stages, whereas now that process is mostly automated. The only time it comes manual is if something falls outside of the cracks. But those are the places where we could not have to increase staff, because that was a very staff intense process. We could get the system to do that, and the staff would do the actual research on the documents, not downloading the documents. But identifying it was hard because they thought that was the way you have to do it. But if you had someone but they didn't have an IT team, they didn't have anyone IT based, so getting someone in to go, okay, like for me, we go all the way back from that process of manual stuff. For me, I look at it and going, I hate this process so much. Let's fix it. Let's change it. Let's make it different.
No, but I am seeing a common pattern, just even talking now, that if any of your staff have to wait amount of time, if there is big files involved in your process, if there is, I always call this, is there a human check-in or is there a system check-in? That's the one big thing I'm always looking at, because human will always have human errors, no matter what you're doing. And sometimes it is right to have a human, sometimes it really isn't. Like, you don't want to be somebody to do it. And then is there repetitive tasks that are just painful, I think. And that just takes just speaking with your team members every so often of just like, what are the things that you think you're doing over and over again as a repeat that are just not worthwhile. That story's crazy, by the way.
Oh, and it is annoyingly so real. And it's so much smoother now. We've been working with them for over a year now. We've enhancing a lot of their systems, so it's a worthwhile investment because they've not had to increase staff for quite some time now, but their workload does keep going up. So, it's a different way to. I guess it's a different cost. We're the cost of resource at that stage, but hopefully we don't have to increase their staff by fourfold, because you're not just talking about paying staff, but then there's the management of the staff and the hierarchy process and everything else that goes in with it and everything else. Yeah.
And I don't know why this I've got this like analogy in my head. If you're a person listening to this podcast and you this is what I can. And you don't really understand IT, But one thing you might understand is in the 90s, when you switched on your computer, you used to press a button and then disappear for 15 minutes whilst it booted up and warmed up.
Yeah.
And we all just, and obviously at the time, because of technology, we just went, yeah, this is just how it's done. This is how it's, it just takes its time because it's the technology.
Yeah.
But now you come to your laptop or you come to, like, I'm on a Mac, and if it is not instant, then I'm like, oh, is my computer wrong?
Do
I
I need to restart? This is the problems. You talk about just that time about turning a PC on, and this isn't really like an automation process, but that kind of efficiency process. But those little things stack up considerably, particularly if you've got a lot of staff. You talk about those. If it did take 15 minutes for everyone's PC to boot up, you got 200 staff. That's 15 minutes per day by 200. That is more than one member of staff if you wanted to increase it. There's small savings that you can do for efficiencies, and then there's larger ones that are more on the potential automation side or efficiency improvement side of it as well.
So let's like a slightly pivot then, is when you've put all these amazing automations in, you've got some different softwares and technologies. When is it the right time to use third-party integration or have something more bespoke?
Oh, that's a really good question. A lot of our stuff is bespoke, but we do touch a lot of third-party stuff. Usually it's pretty much mostly factored by cost. I would probably say more that often than not is by cost or potentially by specific pain points. Third parties are generally cheaper because they've already been built. They're already built, they're already used, and there's already a specific, documentation or something. And usually then it's maintained by someone else, third party. So it's their job to maintain that, not you as a business. But there's different parts to it. And I always say, look at cost. So if you've got a short-term goal in mind, then most likely third-party integrations are probably the fastest and easiest route to support that goal. If you've got a very long-term goal in mind, then I would have a look, because sometimes third party is generally going to be more expensive long term if you were using it for a long period of time, because you're going to be paying a monthly fee or an annual fee for it, and it might not specifically do what you want it to do, because third parties are generally built for everyone, not for your business. They're built for loads of different businesses. So if you wanted to request a change, it's very hard to get that done for third parties, because that change would affect every user, and not every user might want your change, or they'll have to go through all this governance to make sure it doesn't break anyone else's system if they employed that change. Whereas if it's in your own, you've got that opportunity to make those changes or have it in some form of development environment before you put it in your live system and break things. So you've got a lot more flexibility about having those processes. I guess the other big problem with third party is if the third party system ever went for whatever reason, well, that's your whole ecosystem gone with it. Or whatever you've got connected to it. So there's different parts, but generally I would say it comes down to cost. If you're building your own system, it's probably a higher cost at the start, but with lower ongoing costs. Whereas the other ones might be shorter costs, but over time it can grow. Small teams is a lot easier for third party. We can use something like Monday as an example, as a third party integration. It's very cheap to get started on Monday, really. If you've got a small team, it's quite cheap. But if you start to get to 100 to 200 staff, or even close to those numbers, you are then paying a license per user for everyone per month. You're talking $15 a month per user, which is a considerable number, and you might not be using 10% of that system, because you're only using maybe just the project management part. You're not using all of its AI systems or funnel systems. You're just using that one part. So I would definitely have a look at what your end goal is going to be and why you're looking at a third-party process, and then look at reviewing costs of maybe a 1 to 2 year trajectory of what you realistically think you're going to scale to. So factoring in monthly costs, staff increase costs, how many units you're going to put into that third-party system, and then you want to scale whether it's more cost efficient to build something yourself, or it's going to be a better solution to go for it for the third party. So as I say, usually it's a factor of risk, cost, and probably speed more than anything else.
And I like we've always kind of done the podcast in reverse, because it's like if you're looking at your resources, your processes and systems, and actually over 10 years, what things will we have to anticipate to automate, and but also what new technology do we think is going to come in that next 10 years that might take over that custom automation. So in the interim, that the third party does everything that we need right now and probably will hold, let's say, for 3 years. And then we hit the symptoms that we've already spoken about, where we have a scaling business with workload and pressures our employees are becoming too much, and then finding out, do we need to optimize the processes of people, or do we need to optimize the processes of the technology? And we go backwards from that. One of my obviously, I live in a very small business world where I've got teams from sizes of 10 to 100, and when the other one is, when is it time to either go to another third party or to go to a custom? And I'll give you a story. So this business was built on somebody who doesn't know technology, doesn't understand how all of these third parties integrate together. I want to make sure we dive into that. That's kind of always an important one that affects me. It's great how, and so there's WordPress website. They use a third-party cart. They have things like Google, like all the G Suites and analytics. And the biggest difficulty for them has been to analyze their conversion tracking. Yeah. Now, they spent a significant investment optimizing their current system stack of third-party softwares, only for one of those softwares to do an update and then break it all again. Now, it was a kind of easy-ish fix, but it took 2 months to fix. If this story of this company, are they better to upgrade all of their systems, or to stick with their current third-party stack of systems?
That's a good question. The hard part really is, what's your risk aversion? The risk aversion is the problem, the question there. So if your risk aversion is fairly low, and if it breaks again, which is not much of a concern, then stay where you are potentially. If it's an easier solution, it's an easier life, and it's not much of a risk, then probably stay where you are. If that is a business critical system that's going down, or something that really, not even just a business critical from an end user, but business critical for your analysis for your future growth, then I think it's probably time to start looking at an alternative before it's too late, because you don't want to get to the stage where, sure, this time it's a 2-month fix, but what if it's next time it's not? What if next time it can't get fixed, or if it's a 6-month fix, but they say it's fixed, but it's not actually fixed. It's still not fully working, but you don't know it's not working because it's not your system, so you can't look under the hood to find out if it is working or not. And I think it really comes down to the risk aversion of that process of how integrated or how integral is that specific third-party integration into your business. And if it had a problem, we go if it broke for 2 months, but we spoke before about if a system completely goes offline, how much would that affect your business? And is that part of your kind of risk pack to put that in there, saying this is a business critical system and we can't control it?
I like that a lot. It's like that almost risk element. To shortcut it, they definitely should go to basically bite the bullet, and because their solution at the end of the day is something like WordPress WooCommerce, and it would simplify so many people's jobs in how they do not only the analysis of the business, the forecasting of the business, the product management of the business, as well as the user journey itself.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. We spoke about like automation before, which I guess this part's not really automation based, it's more process efficiency and review. But we go through all these different parts about these systems. Now, we get a lot of systems that do want shopping systems. And we spoke about third party, because technically WooCommerce is still third party, right? It's not your own system. You can get the code, but for updates, it's a third-party platform. It's been around for quite some time. You would hope it's not going anywhere, but it's a third-party platform. When we get businesses coming to us asking for like shopping systems, it's very rare we go down the route of saying don't use third-party, because if you wanted to build your own shopping system from scratch, depending on the size of the business, it's a very costly endeavor. Very, very costly endeavor, because you have to think about everything from refund systems to payment processes, payments in different country processes, tax codes in different countries. There's a huge array, delivery options, couriers. There's a lot of different things that you have to put into shopping systems to build them. Whereas people like WooCommerce or Shopify or all these different systems, that is their bread and butter. That's all they're working on. That's what they're supposed to be working on. We've definitely built shopping systems that are bespoke, but it really depends on what the needs are and I guess what the potential cost differences are going to be between those two systems, because you then need to maintain that when taxes change or whenever else we're doing. If it's your system, you have to maintain those updates. No one's doing it for you. So you either need a tech team in there to do that process, or it needs to be versatile enough to make changes to it. So for those ones, definitely have a think about where you want to go, and that's where you get to that risk aversion and cost. Are usually those two sides that you need to look at of where you want to feel that your sweet spot is. I think it's always good to sometimes get estimates. Most tech companies will do most estimates for free. Maybe not go advanced scoping, but general scoping. They'll give you an estimate of what it looks like, so you can kind of get a feel if that cost process is within your budget means, or if it feels too much, then you might have to stay with third party. But definitely looking at bringing more things in. We work with so many companies now that have, and I guess by the sounds of it, yours is quite similar, but where there is data. We worked with a housing association, not housing association, like a housing estate agency, somewhat recently. All their data was stored on a third-party system, and their website would download the third-party data and display it. And probably similar to yours, it wasn't statistics-based, this one, but the third party where the data was being stored changed their API. So they changed it, didn't tell us that they were going to change it, but they changed it and changed how it was serving data back. But because that got changed, systems, other than people can make judgments. Systems don't. Systems follow a process notes, they follow a system path, and that's how it's going to get done. And if that system is no longer there anymore, the only thing that's going to do is break. So again, you got the third party part there, which can cause issues, and it's trying to work out what that risk part is, because for them, for this one, it literally stopped them being able to put all their houses on their website to be sold, because it stopped working. I mean, there's nothing they can do internally other than going back to the other party and saying, you need to fix it or put it back. Or they go, no, this is the new method now. And then that company then goes, right, now I have to pay a developer to change our website or our system.
And if you really want to feel what are the risks of using a third party and not doing the full analysis of the systems, is the CrowdStrike. That's a recent thing that's just happened, which took down a lot of America's planes, essentially, because of one deployment update by one employee from a third-party integration. And that is the impact about not having that risk analysis of where all the different critical points.
Yeah, it's often most of these things come down to budget at the end. So when we do sites now, we've got some sites where we have like staging servers. So realistically, for a full process, you should be, developers should be testing things on their own machines first to make sure it works. Then they would move it to a system that is kind of close to live, not real data, but live-ish, so you make sure it still works. And then when you've done a lot more testing, you then push it to live and do more testing and make sure it's working or be ready for a rollback. But a lot of these systems are integrated directly into your live site, and there's not much you can do if it goes wrong. And that's where the big process is. But a lot of it comes down to budget, because, like I say, sometimes you'll have smaller companies that only can afford one server. So you're only pushing updates to the live system. And there's not much wiggle room that can happen if it goes wrong, because you can't test it. There's different ways to do it. So I think it's always that risk against costs. So if it's high risk and it's low cost, then fix it. Get it sorted as soon as you can, because the benefit of just paying for that fee to not have your business break is paramount to the survival of any business.
I love a good toolkit if there's easy wins, and that to me is just the square, the 4 quadrants. And you do what is the risk, what is the cost, and if it sits in that left-hand corner of low risk, low cost, 2 minutes, go fix it, sort it, do it. Obviously, the further it goes, higher cost, higher risk. There's some thought behind it. If it's high risk, low cost, just do it. And if it's high risk, what was the other one? Low risk, high cost, don't bother. Just eliminate it and delegate and just get rid of it altogether, almost. Now, final question as we sort of draw to the end of the podcast. What is that one big mistake, that common mistake that most business owners and entrepreneurs make when it comes to either automation or third-party integrations? The most common mistake?
Probably simply is the scope and research piece is usually not very good. So by that I mean looking at all things. So often a lot of these third parties, not all, but a chunk of third parties have their costs visible, but there may be hidden costs. So it might say you've got 6 users that can go on the site, great, but actually what you don't know is you're also going to be charged storage fees on top every month that you weren't fully aware of from the get-go. Or they add systems in there for, we were working with one recently where it is about phone systems, like VoIP systems. So they make calls, great. And then it also does loads of cool automations behind the scenes, like sending SMS reminders to people, sending email reminders. It stores voice recordings, all that good stuff you would expect. But every SMS, so they create all the automation flows. But what they don't tell you is every SMS has a specific charge on top. Which, if they're putting those automation rules in, that's kind of unfair because they're forcing those costs when you might not want those rules. So I would probably say it's the scoping piece. What does the system do? Does it do exactly what you need it to do? Does the pricing match what you're looking to scale towards? And then reviewing alternatives as well. And I think that's always what is generally missed, is that people usually don't like certain third parties, not because they're bad, because they don't do what they want it to do. But if they did the research first to check that process, then you can't blame a third party for not having a system they never advertised to have. So I think the biggest part is always the scoping part and doing the research. Most systems, third party, will have account managers or partner managers where you can contact them even before any payments to do the engagement and sales process, so they can give you all the information, get it all in writing of what's going to be in there, get the documentation to review it. And I would say the biggest part is always speak to the people who are about to do that process. Because what I often find is the C-levels or even the management levels will make a decision for a new system or a new process in place, but they haven't actually engaged the people doing the process, and they'll find out, actually, this doesn't do it because this doesn't have that process, or we need it to be compliant with XYZ, and now this no longer works. You just need the engagement with all levels, part of that scoping and research piece, before you choose something and start making payments or go on a contractual basis. Definitely, I think that the first part, the easier part, the research part before you get started. Understand what you actually need.
I love that as like a real simple breakdown of a step-by-step. What can that business owner do when just doing that business analysis that's going to be benchmarked against their 12-month, 3-year or 5-year vision of what they're looking to achieve.
Yep.
And just taking that time to do it. So as a bullet point, I think that's really good. Now, if people have been listening and they're hearing, I've got all of these symptoms in my business and I've got a few of these challenges myself, where can they contact you, Michael?
Generally just my website, so it's just e2estudios.com, or on LinkedIn, just find my name, Michael Pardon. There's not many Pardons, so you'll be able to find me pretty quickly. But that's pretty much it, or just give us a call on our +44 number, I guess, for the UK, 161-533-0989. You can give us a call, but we can go through anything. So we often work specifically on web projects more than anything else, but we do support businesses just with general efficiency savings and reviews of their process, because sometimes it may need tech, sometimes it might not need tech. But we've been in the good part about working in IT to an extent is it's very agnostic to a business. So we've been in a lot of different types of businesses because we don't need to specifically know how to, sell paper or whatever else the process that we're looking for, or do medical reports. But we know a fair chunk of different types of systems because we've had to engage with them with a lot of different types of customers.
Well, before we go, I would like to personally thank you and thank you and your team. I probably like the huge amount of praise for your business, because I do use your services, and that's obviously how we're connected to come onto the podcast. And I hope to keep using your services for as long as possible, because what you're delivering is the best, and that's why I wanted you to get out into the world so more people know about you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working with you as well.
Oh, brilliant. Well, on that note, that's happy note. Have a great day, and I'll see you again soon.